we had a pretty historic moment in Riyadh, courtesy of Donald Trump. So historic and so unexpected that it seems that many within Trump's administration also did not expect the message. So while Trump was doing his Middle East tour and dodging the peace meetings in Turkey, and his responsibility as mediator and as a commitment to ending the war quickly, he made an announcement in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, while Mohammed bin Salman was in the audience, and it caused a 40-minute long stand-up applause reaction from the crowd. And that announcement was that Donald Trump was lifting sanctions on Syria, that he was making that decision. Now, the specifics and details of this process had not been worked out by the State Department. It had not been worked out by those who would actually implement this process and do the technical details. So after this was announced, Marco Rubio had to come with outside in 24 hours and come up with a policy on how exactly this was going to work until Congress could review the Caesar sanctions that were put in place back in 2019 that did, a big blow to the previous government and a big blow to the economy of Syria, or the sanctions that have been put in place way before that. I mean, sanctions that have been put in place for the last 45 years. I mean, to unroll these sanctions is going to take some acts from Congress. So in the meantime, the State Department has decided that they're going to be doing waivers. They're going to be putting out waivers. So the way that the waivers are going to work is that they're going to have basically companies, and in certain areas that they want to work of like energy or somewhere that needs improvement, they're just going to sign waivers. Now, this is a kind of belabored process. So if they can streamline that some way, that would be great. Because right now they're saying that that's really the mechanism that they're going to be using until they make enough progress to see, all of the sanctions actually revealed, and see the laws all repealed, all the sanctions put in place repealed in the next 6 months, right? Now, right now, Rubio is saying that sanctions could come back depending upon future actions, but right now, Trump has set the country on the pathway towards removing the sanctions. And in Syria, they were jubilant. There were fireworks on the street. They were waving Syrian flags. Syrians were bragging about the possibility, the amazing possibility of being able to use Apple Pay in Damascus, as if it was the climbing Mount Everest. It was a great achievement. And the reason it is a great achievement, because access to international exchanges, access to banks, access to these platforms by which people can make exchanges, this helps the Syrian economy. The Syrian economy had immediate benefits overnight. The lira was going up over 30% in value in comparison to the dollar, just off of this announcement. Just off of this announcement. Mind you, now that another week has passed, another announcement has come after this, which has only made Syrians more excited and spells even better news for the Syrian economy. And that is that the European Union is also on path to remove its sanction from Syria as well. And they mean to really remove basically all of the remaining sanctions placed on the government of Bashar al-Assad that was placed on it because it's Assad's rule. They're going to be taking out the sanctions that were levied during 2012 and 2013 concerning transport, energy, and banking sectors. They're going to be reintroducing Syrian banks to the global system, and the freeze of central bank assets are going to be lifted because there was still a freeze on that. Now, the measures targeting the sale of weapons or equipment that quote unquote could repress civilians, that was the logic used by the British government and all the other European governments at the time, because I believe this was before Brexit, mind you. That's why I have to say, and the British government. They're going to keep those restrictions in place. So you're not going to be seeing European countries shipping weapons to Syria anytime soon. But to be completely blunt with you, while Syria is going to need some capacity for a self defense force, this is the biggest, biggest thing any of these countries could have done. But the EU was also explicit to say that the bloc is intending to impose individual sanctions on those responsible for any minority massacres of, say, the Druze community in the south of the country, which Israel, for self-interested reasons, has brought a lot of attention to, or massacres that have affected the Alawite community, which the UN has said has not only affected fighting age men who have engaged in fight combat with other militias, but also women, families, and in some instances, children. Entire families have been killed. Now, whether or not you could say, point it to the family of some Alawite general here that served with Assad or not, killing innocent children and families is not how you have reconciliation. It's not how you tide off a second wave of fighting and civil war. And it is not the Syria that is going to put an end to the violence and bring about law and order. And so the Europeans intend to keep those sanctions in place. The European Union officials have also said that measures could be reimposed, that sanctions could be brought back if Syria's new leaders break their promises on, say, for example, elections coming around the corners, and the respective minority rights. So if they, for example, say you can't be XYZ religion, or they place extremely restrictive laws on Christians, Druze, Shia, or any other or any other minority group. Now, if you're curious as to what was it that caused Trump to make this sudden break with seemingly even his own administration and announcing this a little bit off the cuff, a little bit off the fly, um, well, Trump did express to some amount like wanting to unleash Syria's greatness. Some might, well, maybe there's a humanitarian concern, but I'm going to strike that away. I'm going to strike that away. Now, Trump himself, let's start with Trump himself. Trump himself voiced two people as those who pushed him the most. Number one, Erdogan, the leader of Turkey. He gave him a certain amount of credit. And considering the flip-flopping he did on Syria and support for the SDF in northeastern Syria, at Erdogan's beck and call from decisions made in the middle of the night, this is not that crazy for me to believe. And Mohammed bin Salman, who of course stood up with the rest of the crowd to clap to Trump when he announced it at his event, which, can I just say, we'll get into this a little bit later, really benefits bin Salman especially, but also benefits the Turks. We're going to get into that in a bit. But why did Trump do this? Well, number one, it seems that the Syrians have done some work to try to woo the president, which included offering him access to Syria's oil, reconstruction contracts for the country. There was even talk of Trump Tower in Damascus, so he can put his branding on stuff. He loves stuff like that. And a detente with Israel, meaning, hey, we're not going to fight Israel. Mind you, this is at the same time that Israel is bombing the weapon storage, not only the chemical weapon storage facilities that they knew where they were when these chemical weapon attacks were going on, but also the other resources, military resources of the previous regime, as well as invading illegally deeper into Syria, including capturing Mount Hermon. Now, look, this seemingly middle of the moment decision that Trump made also kind of surprised Israel. Israel was not briefed on this in advance, and back in April, Israel did tell Trump not to do this. So this is Trump breaking with Israel and ignoring them to some degree on this, because Israel has been treating the new administration as, once a jihadi, always a jihadi, and of course with a just, I think, naturally kind of hesitant attitude towards the Syrians, considering their diplomatic history together. But to Trump, I don't really think he cares all that much. He saw the opportunity on top of the $142 billion Saudi weapons contract and the $400 million jet getting awarded to him by another Emirati nation. If we're talking about Qatar, which many of his own party, including Rand Paul and Laura Loomer, some of the populist base, are decrying. Smells really funky. He's getting quite a bit from this. And I think that Donald Trump made the decision to put an exclamation point on his tour in the region. He liked the access, this mineral deal type access to Syria. And he probably got, and while this hasn't been announced, he probably got some dedication or some declaration that they will help them fight terrorism. Now, whether that terrorism will just be ISIS or it's going to include other terror affiliates that other people are a little bit more worried about who can be hosted from Syria, we'll have to wait and see if everything that Trump asked for, including the fight against terrorism, is truly going to be delivered by the government of al-Julani, now known as al-Shura. Now, look, I believe that giving Syria a new chance is the right thing to do, but I also worry that if al-Shura re-implements crackdowns, or the minority crackdowns become much worse, or elections continue to get delayed, that the EU might take one step and Trump is not going to be in lockstep. That there's going to be a break here when it comes to values and keeping al-Shura to the commitment that he made to the Syrian people. I hope that's not the case, but I am worried about that. Ultimately, though, I do think this is good news. I think it's good news for Syria. I hope it will stay good news for Syria, and that we will stay on the path towards democratization and normalization of law and order on the streets. But let me throw some stuff out there for what this means for the region, right? Let's talk first about the winners, okay? First off, Turkey. Turkey was a big supplier of the TFSA, big backer of the rebels, big opponent of Bashar al-Assad, and they were some of the biggest champions of this Hayatir al-Sham offensive that has toppled the government after it was all said and done, going out, waving the flag, happy that the Assad regime is gone and that they can move in with more influence in Syria. They're going to have a lot more influence in Syria, investment opportunities in Syria. They're going to have a strong diplomatic relationship with the next government. And so this helps them continue to gain influence in the region. And so the Turks are happy. The Gulf Arab states are very happy. They were on the pathway to normalization with the Assad regime. They had seemed to have seemingly set in to the idea that the Assad regime was here to stay. It hadn't left yet, so do you really expect it to leave tomorrow? And that dream was smashed in just a couple of weeks. That idea was smashed in just some weeks. Assad was wounded, and then he was promptly brought down as the entire rotten edifice, the whole rotten apparatus, crumbled under him. So the Gulf states get to move in after, flirting with normalization and through investing big in Syria, where many Syrians might remember that brush with normalization pretty negatively, might see that the meetings with Assad and him being invited to this and that, and them getting used to the quote unquote new status quo, as much of the country was still not used to him, that, bitterness in the mouth is being washed out with the billions of dollars in expected investment that's going to be seen by Gulf states now that tariffs have been, sanctions have been brought back. And, al-Julani on the, most wanted is now al-Shura, president of Syria. They can invest in Syria without much concern. Now, of course, until Congress completely removes the sanctions, there is still going to be some hesitation. The full force of the investment, the full enthusiasm when it comes to the actual investors on the ground right now in the short term is going to be blunted, but even that's not completely true, as we're talking about the strength of the lira, as the lira is strengthening. But these states are going to get much more influence in Syria, and they're going to have many economic investment opportunities, as well as undermining an enemy. And that's when we get to the losers. First off, let's talk about the Iranians. My God, how hard can you fumble? So they take Hezbollah in northern Lebanon, and they take those boys and they funnel them into Syria to prop up the Assad regime. And they do that for years and years and years, losing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of its most crack troops. And when I say it's crack troops, they did not send no knowledge militiamen to go blindly fire from around a building corner. No, they sent their crack troops. They sent the ones that knew they were what they were doing, which is part of the reason why the Assad regime lasted as long as they did. But what this was putting makeup and cleaning up a corpse. And that is what that government was. And as time went on and the decay got worse and the rot got worse to the point that you couldn't smell it, when the strike happened and it all came tumbling down, that investment started to hurt them before Assad had even fallen. And it started to hurt them once they got into their new wave of war with the Israelis in late 2023 of October. That was when they started to feel that pain, because that's when they could have used thousands of more crack troops to fight the Israelis on the border. That's when they could have used the financial resources that they dedicated to propping up Assad through, having to spend money on all of this logistics and pay or whatever, and, martyrdom fees and what, if they could have instead spent that on fighting the Israelis. Now, would that have been decisive? Would that really have changed the outcome in some significant way? Honestly, I can't say. That's a totally different scenario. The scenario where Iran does not take years and years of men and dedicate them to the brutal slog of the Syrian civil war. And all those men and material would instead be dedicated down south towards Israel. If that would have changed anything substantially, I really do not know. But it certainly would have made it more difficult for the Israelis. It certainly could have bought Hezbollah more time. And maybe Hezbollah would be in a different state even if it was somewhat just slightly, than it is now. Point is, that investment is lost. Not only is that investment lost, but the reason why they made that investment is lost. They have lost a proxy in Bashar al-Assad, which they never exactly had the strongest control of, as his dealings with Israel showed, but they've lost that proxy. And they have lost a possible pathway to resupply Hezbollah. One of the many reasons that Iran wanted Bashar in power is so they could use Syria as a midway point between Iran and Lebanon in shipping weapons throughout the entire line of the axis of resistance. So you wouldn't have to smuggle it underground, or you wouldn't have to ship it there or this way, that way. You could just have a direct line from Iran all the way to Lebanon with rifles and ammunition and grenades and shoulder propelled anti-armor systems, artillery shells, rocket parts, guidance systems, drones, and just run-of-the-mill maintenance equipment, anything. And so the loss of Syria is not just the loss of that investment, is not just the loss of a proxy ally, it is also the loss of a major route by which they supplied their other allies in Hezbollah and through Hezbollah, by which they engaged in their resistance against Israel. And so not only is Iran a big loser here, Hezbollah is a big loser here. Thank you, General Mark, for the tier 1 sub. Another loser, Russia. There was actually attacks on the Russian port in Tartarus within the last 24 hours that killed multiple Russian soldiers, wounded others. I don't know what that's going to amount in. I don't think that Russia is in much of a position to be just fighting much of the Syrian armed forces, but I also doubt that it was an officially sanctioned attack by the Syrian armed forces. While I cannot say that for sure, it would not be impossible for me to imagine a Syrian government which does not have full control over its troops at this point. having some of its militiamen, some of its militants who have lost children, aunts, uncles, fathers, mothers, friends, compatriots on the battlefield to the Russian bombing, the brutal Russian bombing. Their homes, it could just be them venting some of that anger in a deadly fashion. Either way, though, with the recent sanctions deal from the United States, for them being eager to jump ahead of the curve to relieve sanctions, and with the Gulf Arab states' embrace of Syria, what reason does the Syrians have for allowing the Russians to keep the port in Tartus? Especially considering all the bitter memories of what the Russians did to that country. While it's not impossible that the Russians could find some lump sum that would be economically worth it enough for maybe the Syrian government to consider it, there is a really good chance now, especially with the relieving of these sanctions, if the United States knows what's good for it, which is a question in and of itself, which is why I'm not saying this is for sure done. The Russians are not only losing an ally in Bashar al-Assad, but they're also losing their possible ports that they could use to resupply their proxies in the Middle East and their allies in the region. Another loser is Israel. Israel was openly disregarded by Trump when it comes to their concerns as to the normalization of al-Sharaa, the normalization of the new Syrian government, and them being re-entered into the global economic community, with their argument of Syria just using this new resources to gather up forces to attack Israel, falling on deaf ears as the government of al-Sharaa offers Trump détente with Israel, as well as a bunch of other concessions to, again, woo him. So I think just this shrugging off by Trump is a loss in and of itself for Israel. But if Israel wanted to continue to invade deeper and deeper into Syria, that does not seemingly going to come with the implicit blessing of the President of the United States. And that could mean a red line somewhere within the border of Syria for where Trump might come in and have a Reaganite style moment of, come on, that looks, don't Holocaust the Lebanese, which is what Ronald Reagan said to the Israeli government during their bombing of Beirut. Maybe Trump will have some sort of moment like, oh, come on, leave al-Sharaa alone. Who knows? Who knows? But the point is, Israel's concerns about al-Sharaa were ignored. Al-Sharaa is going to have more economic resources behind him. His government will, and most importantly, Syria will. And with Trump's blessing on this operation by Israel, far from certain, in fact, probably not there, their future military operations in Syria, both land grabs and bombings, are up in the air because they don't know what type of reaction they might get from Trump. And now with the Gulf states having a mechanism to invest in Syria, their economic strength might just be right around the corner, where a destabilized Syria, I think for the Israelis, suits them fine. I really do think a destabilized Syria suits them fine. I remember when you were talking to Cam Higbee about it, he admitted it.